I still remember that Saturday afternoon like it's branded into my brain. The kind of day that feels so ordinary, so predictable, that you'd never think it would end up being the starting point of something that would change the entire course of your life. It was July 17th, 2021. The air in Chicago was heavy and sticky, one of those midsummer days where even the slightest movement made you sweat. I had just finished mowing the lawn, earbuds in, listening to some old Kings of Leon tracks, trying to keep my mind off work. Back then, my life felt stable, or at least that's what I told myself. I was 31, working as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized tech company downtown, living in a quiet neighborhood with my girlfriend, Sarah. We had been together for almost 4 years. We'd moved into our small 2-bedroom apartment in Logan Square just after the lockdowns ended, and at the time it felt like a fresh start. The walls were still bare in some places, and our furniture was a mismatched collection of old IKEA finds and things we'd picked up secondhand from Facebook Marketplace. But to me, it felt like home. Sarah was the kind of person people instantly liked. She had that effortless charm, the kind that made waiters remember her name and baristas give her extra whipped cream on her iced lattes. She worked as a dental hygienist, and every morning she'd leave in her light blue scrubs, hair tied back, a to-go mug of coffee in one hand, and her phone in the other. She'd always play music on the drive, mostly Taylor Swift or Adele, and I'd hear her humming through the walls while she got ready. We had a routine. Mondays were for meal prepping, Wednesdays were for trivia nights at this small bar near Damen Avenue, and Fridays were usually takeout and Netflix. Saturdays were unpredictable. Sometimes we'd go out with friends. Sometimes we'd stay in and just talk. I used to love those quiet nights, the ones where we'd lie in bed talking about our future, trips we wanted to take, houses we wanted to buy someday, maybe even kids. She'd always get this dreamy look in her eyes when she talked about having a family, and I genuinely believed she wanted that life with me. But in hindsight, there were cracks, small, almost invisible ones, that I refused to see. It started with little things. Her phone, which used to be lying around everywhere, started to stay glued to her hand. I'd notice her turning the screen away when notifications popped up. When I'd casually ask who she was texting, she'd say, "Just Emily," or "Work stuff, don't worry." And I didn't. At least not then. I'd been in enough relationships before to know how paranoia can ruin things, so I forced myself to trust her. Then there were the nights she worked late. At first it made sense. She said her clinic had been short-staffed and patients were piling up after months of COVID restrictions. I even felt guilty for questioning it, telling myself I should be more supportive. But as weeks turned into months, those late shifts started feeling too frequent, too convenient. I remember one evening in particular, mid-May, a few months before everything fell apart. She came home past 10 p.m., smelling faintly of perfume, not the one she usually wore. Her hair was down, curled slightly, and she looked different. I asked if everything was okay, and she smiled, said she'd gone for a quick drink with a couple of colleagues after work. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. That's the cruel part about love. It blinds you, but it does it slowly, so you don't notice how deep in the fog you are until you're choking on it. I used to joke with my best friend, Mike, that Sarah could be robbing a bank and I'd probably still defend her. Mike never liked her much. He said she had this too perfect energy, like she was always performing. I'd get defensive whenever he brought it up, brushing it off as him being overprotective. After all, Mike had known me since college, since my days at the University of Illinois. He'd seen me go through my fair share of heartbreaks, and he always worried I let my emotions cloud my judgment. The irony is, he was right. Around early June, I noticed Sarah had started hanging out with a new group of friends. She mentioned them casually, co-workers apparently, people from her clinic. There was one name she brought up a little more often, Josh. I remember the first time I heard it. She was on FaceTime with someone, laughing, her voice softer than usual, and when I walked into the room, she said, "Oh, that's just Josh from work." Just Josh. At first, it didn't bother me. I'd been around long enough to know that in any relationship, your partner is going to have people in their life you don't know well. But something about the way she said his name stuck in my mind. Like it rolled off her tongue too easily, too comfortably. Then came the shopping trips. Sarah loved to shop. It was one of her favorite ways to unwind. Every other weekend, she'd say she was going out with her friends to do some damage at the mall. She'd come back with bags from Zara, H&M, Sephora. Nothing unusual. But over time, I noticed the patterns didn't make sense. She'd leave around noon, say she was meeting the girls, and wouldn't come back until late in the evening, sometimes with barely one or two small bags. She'd say they'd stop for drinks or dinner, but I couldn't shake this faint, uneasy feeling. One night, out of pure curiosity, I checked her Instagram stories. Nothing. Then I checked Emily's, one of her closest friends. Emily had posted pictures that day, brunch with two other girls. No Sarah in sight. When I asked about it later, she shrugged and said she'd gone shopping separately, that the girls had changed plans last minute. I told myself not to read into it. I wish I had, because that tiny moment of doubt, that quiet little knot in my gut, was my first real warning. But when you love someone, your brain becomes an expert at making excuses. You rationalize the irrational. You trade your instincts for peace of mind. July rolled around, and we were planning a small getaway to Michigan. I had just booked an Airbnb near the lake, a cozy little cabin. I wanted to surprise her, so I didn't tell her right away. The night before I was going to show her the booking, she told me she had plans to go shopping with friends the next day. I didn't think much of it, until later that night when she was in the shower and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Now, I've never been the kind of person to snoop. I've always believed that if you go looking for something, you'll find it, even if it's not really there. But something about that moment felt different. The screen lit up, and the message preview read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." No name, just that. I remember staring at the phone like it was a live grenade. My hands were actually shaking. I didn't open it, not then. I just sat there, staring at that glowing rectangle, wondering if I'd just imagined it. When she came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, smiling at me, I felt this rush of guilt for even thinking something was off. She kissed my forehead, crawled into bed, and within minutes, she was asleep. Meanwhile, I lay there staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, replaying every little moment, every late night, every shopping trip, every time she'd smiled at her phone and said it was just a coworker. By morning, I convinced myself I was overthinking. I told myself love requires trust. I went on with my day, made coffee, watched her get ready, kissed her goodbye at the door. But something in me had shifted. Later that afternoon, while cleaning up the kitchen counter, I found her latest credit card bill in the mail. Normally, she handled her own finances, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, not looking for anything in particular, maybe just to distract myself. But then I saw it. A charge for a high-end restaurant downtown. Gibson's Italia, dated last Saturday. The same day she said she'd been shopping with her friends. I stared at the statement, rereading it over and over, hoping I'd misread it. But there it was. Dinner for two, over $200, and suddenly everything started to make sense. The perfume, the late nights, the laughter that didn't sound like it was for me. My hands went cold, my stomach twisted. And for the first time in 4 years, I realized that maybe the woman I thought I knew, the one I'd built a life with, had been living a completely different story. I didn't confront her right away. I wish I could say I did, that I had the courage to just ask her, but I didn't. I spent that night pacing the living room, the sound of rain tapping against the window, trying to convince myself that maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a group dinner. Maybe someone else paid and it just happened to go through her card, but deep down, I knew. That was the night everything inside me started to unravel, and I had no idea, absolutely no idea, that the truth I was about to uncover would not only break me, but change the way I looked at love forever. The next few days after finding that restaurant charge felt like living in slow motion. Everything looked the same on the surface, Sarah smiling, laughing, acting as if nothing had changed. But to me, it was as if the colors of my world had started to fade. Every gesture, every word she said, suddenly had a question mark attached to it. When she texted someone and smiled at the screen, I noticed. When she said she was tired from work, I noticed. When she hugged me goodnight, I noticed the distance, even if it was just an inch between her chest and mine, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be that guy. Paranoid, controlling, insecure. The truth was I was scared. Scared that if I asked the question, I'd get an answer I wasn't ready to hear. So I waited. I watched. And then, one Friday night, about a week later, something happened that made it impossible to ignore. Sarah was supposed to be working a late shift. She'd left around 3 p.m., wearing her scrubs, hair tied up, her usual routine. I spent the evening at home, cooking pasta, watching the Cubs game, trying to distract myself. Around 9 p.m., I texted her, "How's your shift going?" She didn't reply. An hour passed, then 2. By midnight, I was pacing again. Finally, at 12:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Sorry, babe, super busy. Heading home soon? Love you." It should have eased my mind, but it didn't. Because I'd seen that message pattern before. The kind that sounds rehearsed, generic, like something you'd copy-paste to keep someone calm. I stared at the text for a while before a strange thought crossed my mind, one I'd never had before. I opened the Find My app. Now I know how that sounds. Creepy, invasive. But we'd shared our locations for safety reasons ages ago, after an incident where her car broke down on I-90. It wasn't something I checked regularly, but that night, something inside me pushed me to look, and there it was. Her phone wasn't at the dental clinic. It wasn't even in the same part of the city. It was pinging from a location in River North, near the same block as Gibson's Italia. For a long minute, I just stared at the little blue dot on my screen. My brain was screaming no, but my gut whispered yes. This is it. I sat down, my hands trembling, trying to decide what to do. Do I drive there? Do I call her? Do I pretend I didn't see it? It felt like my entire body was caught between rage and heartbreak. After about 10 minutes of pacing, I grabbed my keys and left. The city felt eerily alive that night. Neon reflections bouncing off wet pavement. Taxis honking, people spilling out of bars, laughter echoing down the streets. I remember thinking how unfair it was that the world could look so beautiful while my life was cracking apart. When I pulled up near the restaurant, I parked a block away. I didn't even know what I was expecting to see. Maybe I'd find her with her coworkers. Maybe it was a group dinner. Maybe, and this was my desperate hope, maybe I was wrong. But then I saw her. She was standing outside the restaurant, under the soft golden glow of the streetlights. Her hair was down, not tied up like when she'd left for work. She wasn't in scrubs. She was wearing a short black dress, the one I'd bought her last Christmas. And she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident posture that made people look twice. I didn't need to guess who he was. I knew, instinctively, that this was Josh. They were laughing, standing close, her hand brushing his arm. It wasn't the kind of touch that could be mistaken for friendship. It was intimate, familiar. And then he leaned in and kissed her. My entire body froze for a moment. It felt like everything around me, the sounds, the lights, even the air, just stopped. The only thing that existed was that image. Sarah, the woman I loved, kissing someone else like I never existed. I wish I could say I confronted her right then and there. I wish I could say I made a scene, demanded answers, screamed, cried, something. But I didn't. I couldn't move. My hands tightened on the steering wheel so hard I thought it would crack. My chest hurt in a way I can't even put into words. Eventually, I started the car and drove off. I don't even remember the route I took. I just drove aimlessly through the city until I found myself parked by the lake. It was past 2 a.m., the water dark and endless, and I just sat there staring at it, trying to process what I'd just seen. There's something deeply cruel about betrayal. It's not just about losing someone. It's about realizing the person you thought they were never really existed. Every memory you shared, every smile, every "I love you" starts to feel counterfeit, like you've been living inside someone else's performance. I don't remember how long I sat there, but by the time I went home, the sky was already turning pale blue. When I walked into the apartment, everything looked exactly the same. Her shoes by the door, her mug in the sink, our framed photos on the shelf. It was like the universe was mocking me with normalcy. She came home around 7 a.m., pretending to yawn. Her makeup was slightly smudged, and she smelled faintly of his cologne, that musky, masculine scent that wasn't mine. I could barely look at her. She said her shift had been crazy, that she was going to shower and sleep. I nodded, pretending to buy it. Inside, I was breaking apart piece by piece. That day, I didn't go to work. I called in sick, shut off my phone, and just sat in silence. I kept replaying that kiss in my head over and over like a scene stuck on repeat. I tried to tell myself it could still be a misunderstanding, that maybe she was drunk or maybe I don't know. Maybe I didn't see what I thought I saw. But the truth was clear. Later that afternoon, I did something that even now makes my stomach twist. I opened her laptop. She'd left it on the couch, logged in. I hesitated for a long time before touching it, but curiosity and pain are a dangerous combination. I checked her browser history first. There were searches for hotels, restaurants, and messages synced from her iPhone. That's when I found them. Texts between her and Josh. Scrolling through those messages felt like bleeding in slow motion. They'd been talking for months. At first, it was flirty on compliments, jokes. Then it turned emotional, intimate. She told him things she used to tell me. That she felt seen by him. That he made her feel alive again. There were plans, dinners, weekends, even talks about the future. The last message broke me. She'd texted him. I wish I could tell him the truth. I hate pretending. And he replied, "You will soon." I'll make sure of it. That was it. The breaking point. All the anger I'd been holding back turned into something sharp, electric. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart racing, my mind spinning between heartbreak and fury. I didn't confront her that night either. Instead, I decided I needed to think. I needed to figure out what I was going to do. Whether I wanted revenge or closure or both, I didn't know. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living a lie. The next morning, I woke up early and left the apartment before she did. I drove to Mike's place, my oldest friend. He was half asleep when he opened the door, but when he saw my face, he didn't even ask. He just said, "What happened?" I told him everything. The restaurant, the text, the kiss. Saying it out loud felt like ripping open a wound, but it also felt like the first honest breath I'd taken in weeks. He listened quietly, his jaw tightening with every detail. When I finished, he said something I'll never forget. "Don't confront her yet. Make her tell you the truth herself. People like that, they'll lie until the last breath if you don't trap them with proof." And that's exactly what I decided to do. I spent the next few days pretending like nothing had changed. Smiling, laughing, making dinner, acting normal. It was torture, like living inside a movie where everyone else had the script but you. But I needed time. I needed her to show her hand, because the truth wasn't enough. Anymore. I wanted to see her lie to my face, and when she did, when she looked me straight in the eyes and told me she'd been shopping with friends again, I knew exactly what I had to do next. After that moment, everything in my world unraveled piece by piece in ways I never could have imagined. It wasn't dramatic at first. No shouting matches, no slamming doors, no immediate confrontations. At first, it was the subtle things that cut the deepest. The quiet dinners where I'd stare across the table at her smiling face, pretending everything was fine while my stomach twisted into knots. The sound of her laughter, which used to make me feel warm inside, now felt like a knife twisting. I tried to keep my routine, went to work, met deadlines, smiled at colleagues, but inside, I was collapsing. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, fearing another message from Josh. Every social media notification felt like a potential betrayal, and I found myself obsessively checking her accounts, her friends' accounts, anything that could give me a glimpse into the life she was living without me. Work became unbearable. I remember sitting in a meeting one afternoon at my office downtown, the hum of fluorescent lights above me, listening to a presentation about brand strategies, and all I could think about was the texts I'd seen, every "I miss you" and "I can't wait to see you" echoing in my mind. My normally sharp focus dissolved into haze, my hands clammy, tapping nervously on the edge of the conference table. I was physically there, but mentally, I was somewhere far away, lost in a storm of betrayal. The apartment became a prison. Every corner reminded me of her. The couch where we had watched our first movie together after moving in, the little shelf where we kept our travel souvenirs, the coffee mugs she left scattered on the counter. I couldn't look at anything without thinking, she was lying to me here, she was lying to me there. Every time she left for work or shopping, I checked her location obsessively, hoping, praying that she was really where she said she was. But deep down, I knew the truth. And the worst part? I couldn't talk to anyone about it. Not really. Mike knew some details, but I couldn't go around telling coworkers, friends, or even family about it. It was humiliating. I felt trapped in a private hell, forced to smile, forced to play the role of the boyfriend who had no clue, all while knowing the life I thought I had built was crumbling under my feet. Sleep became a joke. I would lie in bed at night staring at the ceiling, replaying everything I had seen, the kiss, the texts, the lies. My mind was relentless, looping over every memory of our relationship. The little red flags I had ignored now screamed at me like sirens. Every time she reached for my hand, I flinched. Every time she said, "I love you," my chest tightened in anger and sorrow. I felt like I was walking through life in a fog, haunted by ghosts of the life I thought I knew. I started drinking more, something I had never done before. A couple of beers in the evening turned into late-night Scotch sessions by myself. I would sit on the balcony, the smell of the city mixing with the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the apartment, and just stare out over the skyline, thinking about how someone I trusted completely could betray me so easily. There were nights I cried, ones where I screamed into pillows, ones where I just sat numb, questioning everything, my judgment, my love, my ability to know a person at all. Family and friends noticed the change. My parents called more often, concerned about my withdrawn nature, my distracted answers. Mike started showing up unannounced, bringing pizza or coffee, trying to get me to eat something to talk. I wanted to tell them everything, but the humiliation held me back. Pride, shame, and heartbreak were intertwined in a way I didn't understand yet. And then came the confrontation I had been dreading, but also anticipating. I had spent a week gathering evidence, bank statements, timestamps, screenshots. I knew exactly where she had been, who she had been with, and for how long. My hands shook as I sat at the kitchen table, laying it all out in front of me like a crime scene. I didn't want her to talk, to lie. I wanted her to see what she had done. When she came home that night, she had that same casual smile like nothing was wrong. I remember feeling a cold, hollow rage bubble up inside me. I looked her straight in the eyes and asked, "Where were you last Saturday?" She blinked, a little startled, and said, "Shopping with friends, why?" That's when I laid it all out. The restaurant receipt, the texts, the location history. I watched her face shift, first from surprise, then confusion, then the slow realization that she had been caught. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted around, searching for a way out, a way to explain, to justify. But there was no excuse, not one that could erase the months of betrayal. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. She just stood there, frozen. And I realized then that this was the person I had loved for 4 years. The mask finally slipping, revealing the truth beneath. I felt a strange mixture of triumph and devastation. Triumph that I had finally uncovered the truth. Devastation that the truth was exactly as ugly as I had feared. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding, and for the first time in days, I felt a small sense of release, the kind that comes after a storm passes, leaving destruction in its wake. The following weeks were hell. Sarah moved out temporarily, claiming she needed space, but I knew she was seeing him. I tried to focus on work, but every time my phone buzzed, my stomach dropped. I tried therapy, but talking to a stranger about betrayal didn't feel the same as confiding in someone who understood. Nights were still sleepless. Mornings were still heavy, and then came the rumors at work. Some of our colleagues had noticed she wasn't around, or maybe they had heard whispers. The gossip spread like wildfire, and I suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. People I had trusted with my daily life now looked at me with curiosity or pity. It was humiliating, a second betrayal of sorts. My relationship with Mike became my lifeline. We would spend hours on the phone, sometimes in silence, sometimes venting, sometimes just sitting in his living room, sharing a pack of cigarettes and watching reruns of old shows. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't offer advice. He just listened, and somehow that made a difference. But the hardest part was the reflection. The nights I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I had ignored the red flags, how I had justified the lies, how I had allowed myself to be so blind. The person I thought I knew, the life I thought I had, all of it had been an illusion. And worse, I had invested so much of myself, time, love, hope, into someone who had no intention of reciprocating honestly. I started to question everything about myself. Was I too naive? Too trusting? Too desperate for love? Every flaw, every insecurity I had ever held felt magnified. I became hyper-aware of my own mistakes, of the ways I had unknowingly contributed to the vulnerability that allowed this betrayal to happen. One night, a few weeks into this downward spiral, I found myself standing on the balcony again, staring at the city lights, feeling the weight of it all pressing down. I remembered the first time we had moved into the apartment, how excited we were, how hopeful. The smell of paint, the sound of furniture being assembled, the laughter as we unpacked boxes together. And I realized with a clarity that hurt like hell that those moments were real, but the trust underpinning them was broken beyond repair. I didn't know how to move forward yet. I didn't know if I wanted revenge, closure, or simply peace. All I knew was that life, as I had known it, had ended. And now I had to figure out what came next, because heartbreak, as I was learning the hard way, wasn't a single moment. It wasn't the kiss or the text or even the lies. It was the long, grinding process of losing yourself while trying to make sense of losing someone you thought you loved. And I was only just beginning to understand how far that process would take me. The weeks after I uncovered Sarah's betrayal felt like a blur, a constant mix of rage, sorrow, and obsessive plotting. I realized early on that doing nothing wasn't an option. Sitting around and letting her actions define my life, letting her get away with what she'd done, was not something I could stomach. So I decided, not immediately but eventually, that I needed a plan. Not necessarily for revenge in the dramatic, movie-like sense, but a plan for control, for clarity, for reclaiming the pieces of my life she had shattered. I started small. I organized my finances, something I'd been lax about before. I tracked every dollar, every credit card statement, making sure there were no surprises, because in the wake of betrayal, even minor uncertainties felt like betrayals themselves. I moved my accounts, changed passwords, ensured there was a clear boundary between her world and mine. It was meticulous work, but strangely therapeutic. Each action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been lost in the chaos. Then came the research. I needed to understand, to map out the extent of her lies. I revisited everything I had seen. The texts, the restaurant receipts, her location history. I started keeping a journal, documenting each deception with dates, times, and supporting evidence. The act of writing it down, organizing it, gave me a sense of purpose. It wasn't about obsessing over her anymore. It was about equipping myself with knowledge. Knowledge was power, and I needed power after feeling so helpless for so long. Social media became a strange battlefield. At first, I resisted the urge to check their posts obsessively, but I knew I couldn't fully ignore it. Every tagged photo, every story, every shared check-in became a piece of a larger puzzle. I started noticing patterns, subtle things I hadn't before. The way Josh's friends always seemed to be around. The times of day Sarah would coincidentally be away from home. It wasn't healthy, and I knew it, but it was part of the process of reclaiming control. The turning point, however, came from within. One night, around late August, I sat alone in my apartment, glass of whiskey in hand, looking at the reflection of the city in the window. I realized that for weeks, maybe months, I had been living as a victim, letting my anger and heartbreak dictate my actions, letting someone else's betrayal define my emotional state. I felt exhausted, drained, and frankly pathetic. And in that moment, I made a conscious decision. I was done being a victim. I would not let this define me. I channeled that energy into self-improvement. I joined a local gym and started running along the lakefront trail in the mornings, watching the sunrise over Lake Michigan, feeling each stride as a small reclamation of my body and my mind. I started reading again, not just escapist novels, but books on psychology, relationships, and human behavior, trying to understand what had gone wrong, and more importantly, how I could prevent it from happening again. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into projects, impressing my boss and colleagues. I found satisfaction in results, in recognition, in the tangible progress that contrasted sharply with the chaos of my personal life. It wasn't a distraction. It was a rebuilding of identity. I was no longer just Sarah's boyfriend. I was me again. And yet, despite all this, there was still the lingering question of closure. I didn't want to confront her in anger. I had learned that fueled nothing but more pain. But I did want acknowledgement, a truth. So I decided to craft a situation where she would have no choice but to face it herself. It started with subtle shifts. I stopped picking up her calls immediately. I stopped responding to her texts with warmth or affection. I became deliberate, measured, almost indifferent. She noticed. She tried to engage, to charm, to manipulate, the same tactics she had used for months. But now they didn't work. Each attempt of hers only reinforced my growing strength, my resolve. Then one evening, I sent a carefully worded message. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't emotional. It was precise, cold even. "We need to talk about last Saturday." "I know where you were." Her reply came almost instantly. We need to talk." "Can we meet?" We met the next day at a neutral location, a small cafe near Wicker Park. I remember the sun was bright, the smell of coffee and fresh pastries mingling in the air, the clatter of cups against saucers creating an oddly soothing background. She arrived, eyes wide, face pale, clearly realizing that the careful control she had exercised over the situation was slipping. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just spoke. Calmly, methodically, I laid out everything I had discovered, the texts, the locations, the receipts. I watched her face shift from confusion to panic to guilt, and finally to shame. For the first time, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt power, not over her exactly, but over the narrative of my life. I was no longer being blindsided, no longer the naive victim. She tried to explain, of course. She cried, she apologized, she begged for understanding, for forgiveness. But I had already made peace with the fact that some things couldn't be fixed. Trust once shattered is nearly impossible to rebuild. And besides, I didn't want to forgive her. Not for her sake, not for Josh's, not for anyone but me. I left that meeting with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I realized that healing and empowerment weren't about retaliation or humiliation. They were about reclaiming my sense of self, about refusing to let someone else's betrayal dictate my worth. Over the next few months, I focused entirely on rebuilding my life. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see. New Orleans, the Scottish Highlands, even a solo trip to Paris. I threw myself into hobbies I had abandoned. Photography, running, even cooking classes. I reconnected with friends I had let drift away, people who reminded me who I was outside of a relationship. I also made sure to set firm boundaries. Sarah tried reaching out intermittently, but I was polite, distant, unyielding. The cold indifference hurt her more than any confrontation ever could. And through it all, I felt my strength returning, piece by piece. By the end of the year, I was a different person. Not bitter, not broken, just wiser, more cautious, and far more aware of my own resilience. I didn't need revenge in the way I had initially imagined. Life had a way of balancing things out on its own. What I needed was self-respect, and finally, I had it. I realized that betrayal, painful as it is, can also be transformative. It forces you to confront yourself, your expectations, and your boundaries. It strips away illusions and leaves you raw, but also incredibly capable of rebuilding a stronger, more authentic life. And as I sat on my balcony that December evening, watching the snow lightly dust the city, sipping a cup of hot tea, I felt it, the first genuine sense of peace in months. I had survived the storm, faced the truth, and emerged stronger. The world was still messy, still unpredictable, but I had regained control over the one thing that mattered most, myself. By early 2022, I had completely rebuilt my life, piece by piece, like a puzzle I thought was ruined forever. I moved into a new apartment, a one-bedroom near Lakeview with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the morning sun and the faint smell of the lake breeze. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. No reminders of Sarah, no traces of a life that had ended, just space that felt like freedom. I threw myself fully into work, but differently this time. Before, I had used my career as a distraction. Now I used it as a foundation, a place to build confidence, skill, and identity. I got promoted to a senior marketing strategist role by March, which was more than just a paycheck. It was validation, proof that I could thrive even after being knocked down emotionally. My colleagues noticed the change too. The quiet, withdrawn guy they had seen in 2021 was gone. In his place was someone calm, composed, and determined. Socially, I also began to reclaim what I had lost. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, people who reminded me of the life I had outside of a relationship. There were nights of laughter that didn't feel forced, evenings where I could talk openly about everything and nothing, without judgment, without heartbreak lurking around the corner. I even started dating again, cautiously at first. Not to replace what I had lost, but to remind myself that love wasn't inherently dangerous. Only unguarded trust had been. I still thought about Sarah occasionally. Not often, but sometimes usually triggered by a memory or a song. I thought about the way she smiled at me, about the trips we had planned, about the small routines that had once made life feel safe and ordinary. But the thoughts were no longer sharp knives. They were like old photographs, reminders of a story that belonged in the past. There was a turning point that finally sealed the closure for me. In April, a mutual friend reached out and casually mentioned seeing her with Josh downtown. He had apparently moved into a different city, and she had changed jobs. That piece of information, innocuous as it seemed, felt like the final page of a chapter closing. I didn't feel anger nor satisfaction. I felt indifferent. Life had moved on, and so had I. That's when I realized the most important thing I had learned from the entire ordeal. Betrayal, as devastating as it is, isn't the end of you. It's a catalyst. It forces you to confront weaknesses, to set boundaries, and to grow in ways you wouldn't have imagined. I wasn't the same person I had been when I discovered the truth about Sarah, and I was grateful for it in a strange, ironic way. By summer, I had embraced a lifestyle that prioritized me, my health, my happiness, and my passions. I started running half marathons, something I had always dreamed of but never committed to. I traveled again, exploring hidden parts of Chicago I had ignored, and eventually even took a solo road trip along the California coast, soaking in the endless horizon, the smell of salt in the air, and the quiet, liberating feeling of being entirely responsible for myself. Romantically, I learned patience and self-respect. I met someone eventually, an Emma, at a photography workshop in October. She was kind, grounded, funny in a way that didn't feel performative. We spent months building a slow, steady connection, founded on honesty, shared values, and mutual respect. There were no games, no hidden agendas, just a partnership that felt nourishing rather than suffocating. And it felt right, like finally breathing after being underwater for too long. Looking back now, I realized that the pain I went through, the heartbreak, the betrayal, wasn't wasted. It shaped me. It taught me about boundaries, about the importance of listening to gut instincts, about trusting my own judgment above all else. And it taught me something crucial, that healing is not about revenge, not about exposing someone else's lies, not about controlling what they do. It's about taking back control of yourself. I still remember the exact moment I felt truly free again. It was a crisp November morning, the kind where the sun glints off the skyscrapers and the wind carries a hint of frost. I was running along the lakefront trail, headphones in, music pushing me forward, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt completely present. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was distant, like an echo in a canyon. My heart wasn't heavy anymore. It was steady, strong, and unafraid. The truth about Sarah, about her lies, her deceit, her choices, became a closed chapter. I didn't need to dwell on it. Life had proven more potent than my anger or grief. I had survived. I had grown. And I had learned that even when someone shatters your trust, you have the power to pick up the pieces and build something better. In the end, that's the resolution I found. Not in confrontation, not in revenge, not in punishment, but in reclaiming my life, my identity, and my ability to trust myself again. The betrayal was a wound, yes, but also a teacher. And I emerged on the other side, scarred but stronger, wiser, and finally, free, because sometimes the most powerful revenge is living well, unapologetically, and without anyone else's lies defining your story. And as I ran that morning, wind in my face, city below me, I smiled, not at her, not at the past, but at me, the man who survived. The man who chose himself, and that, more than anything else, felt like victory.